I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Welcome to IFAS Online, the Illinois Farm Economics Summit. This is one of 6 online webinars featuring the agricultural economists from the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois. You can always find them in the archive whenever you'd like at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu. Today, Joana Colussi joins us. She'll talk about South America, agricultural production, markets, and trade. Joana is from Brazil, and she is a postdoctorate here at the University of Illinois. Has been a member of the farmdoc team for a couple of years, was on the road with us across the state in the early part of January talking about this same issue. Joana, thank you very much. I know that farmers have been intrigued by the presentation you have made. They always have lots of questions. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say again today.
Thank you so much, Todd. Good morning, Gary, Jean. Thanks for the excellent introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. It's great to be here. I'm very happy with the opportunity to talk again about agriculture in South America. You are right, the FarmDoc team had a really good time in the 3 in-person IFAS meetings at the beginning of January. And today, almost 1 month later, we will discuss the recent forecasts and information about the crop season in South America. As you know, it's summer in Brazil and in Argentina also, so it's time to look and see what's going on there. So let's start. I'm going to talk today about these topics. First, an overview of agriculture in South America. Second, I will talk about Brazilian and Argentina's crop prospects, especially corn and soybeans. Finally, I will put together some topics to keep an eye over the next few months and years. And then I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. So very quick, so a little bit about me. Like Todd said, I'm from Brazil. I grew up in the south of Brazil, near Argentina and Uruguay. I'm a gaucha. People born in my state, Rio Grande do Sul, are called gauchos, like cowboys. And by the way, this picture was taken less than 2 months ago during my last visit to Brazil. In this region, located on the map, the first soybean crop in Brazil was planted over 100 years ago. So let's start by providing a South America overview. You probably know that South America produces more soybeans than the United States and is becoming a more important producer of corn. Total, South America produces 7.2 billion bushels of soybeans. World production shares are 54% for South America, which is divided into 37% for Brazil, 13% for Argentina, and 4% for the rest of South America. The United States makes up 34% of the world soybean production. This graph presents some comparison in the context of U.S. states just to help you understand how big grain production actually is in South America. For example, Brazil produces more soybeans than the United States. Argentina produces almost as many soybeans as the combined output of Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Indiana, the 4 largest soybean states. So let's move on to corn. South America produced 6.7 billion bushels of corn. Global production shares are 31% for the US and 15% for South America, divided into 90% for Brazil, 5% for Argentina, and 1% for the rest of South America. And again, very quick, some comparison in the context of U.S. States. South America produces only about half as much corn as the United States. However, Brazil produces 7% more corn on average than Iowa, the largest U.S. corn state, while Argentina produces more corn than every state in the U.S. except Iowa and Illinois. So finish that. Let's move on to the crop projections for the current crop season in Brazil this year. Take a look at the numbers regarding soybean production. Brazilian soybean acreage is expected to grow 4%, and the production is projected to be a record, more than 5.6 billion bushels, increase of 22% compared to last season. This increase represents a recovery from last season when Brazil faced a drought in the south of Brazil. Here on the map, we can see the weather situation this week, the first week of the February in Brazil, with favorable conditions in most regions. As you can see, the green areas in center west, northeast, and parts of the southeast, in parts of the south too, except in Rio Grande do Sul. There, the situation is entirely different in the extreme south of Brazil. Look at the yellow and orange areas with light and moderate droughts. And the situation is even worse in the western part of Rio Grande do Sul, the red area on the map. That's the area that I was in December, 2 months ago, and that I showed the picture in the northwest of Rio Grande do Sul. February is a crucial period for soybeans in this region. So we will be watching it over the next few weeks to see what's going on there and to have more ideas about the situation regarding soybeans. So the soybean harvest in the center west is completely different, the situation there. The soybean harvest has started in the center west, the main agricultural region in Brazil. Around 5% of the area was harvested by January 28, compared with 11% a year ago, according to data from the National Supply Company, CONAB. This delay was caused by constant rains in the region. So meanwhile, we have drought in the south of Brazil. We have some excessive rains in the center west of Brazil. This is an effect from La Niña. I will talk a little bit more about that. But despite this delay in the start of the harvest, yields have been good so far, around 57 acres per bushel on average in Mato Grosso. Mato Grosso is the largest producing state in Brazil. By the way, this picture was taken this week in Querência City in Mato Grosso state. So let's move on now to the south of Brazil. We can see a completely different situation there. Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil's number 3 soybean producer, has faced irregular rains since the beginning of the season, so since September, October, November. So far, initial production has been reduced by 15% there. But this percentage may increase in February if the drought continues there. These pictures that you can see on the screen were taken in January in the regions affected by drought in Rio Grande do Sul state. We have here Passo Fundo in the north of Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Maria, central of Rio Grande do Sul, and again, Santa Maria, central of Rio Grande do Sul. Of course, we have different situations within the state too. I'll show you some pictures that in the regions that most affected by the drought this year. However, despite the losses in the south of Brazil, I think I moved one. Yield gains in the center west should offset them. In this map, you can see the soybean distribution in Brazil by region. For example, 3 states in the center west, Mato Grosso, Goiás, and Mato Grosso do Sul, represent 45% of soybean production in Brazil. Rio Grande do Sul, when we have drought, represents around 15% of soybean production in Brazil. So despite the losses in the south, the yield gains in the center west should offset this situation there. So let's move on to corn production in Brazil now. The acreage is expected to grow 4%, and the production is projected to reach almost 5 billion bushels, a new record that represents an increase of 11% compared to the last season. It's important to highlight, because we are talking about drought, and at the same time we are talking about a new record. This amount that we are talking about refers to the total corn production, including first, second, and third crop. So that number, that pictures that I show earlier is regarding the first crop that we plant in the summertime. So I will talk a little bit about that soon. Here, for example, you can see the weather situation regarding the first corn crop in Brazil, in the south of Brazil especially. Favorable conditions, green areas in parts of southeast and northeast, light drought in yellow areas, and moderate drought, orange areas in the south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul state, where the harvest started in January. The red areas, like soybeans, show a severe drought in the northwest of Rio Grande do Sul. So far, losses are estimated to be around 50% in these areas, in the red areas. In orange areas, around 30%. In yellow areas, around 20%. So the first crop corn, the harvest, started now last month in January. Again, when I talk about these crop conditions, it's just the first crop. So here, these pictures were taken in the regions affected by drought in Rio Grande do Sul states. Corn fields are suffering from the lack of the rain again. Here you can see some pictures in Tupanciretã, in the central of Rio Grande do Sul. Tupanciretã is the number one city with the most numbers of the hectares in Rio Grande do Sul. We have another picture, cornfield in Salto do Jacuí, central of Rio Grande do Sul, and one picture in Santa Rosa, northwest of Rio Grande do Sul, that was taken in December 2022. Here, again, you are talking about the first crop, not the second crop, the safrinha, that will begin right after the soybean harvest in the center-west. Actually, at this moment in Brazil, after the harvest of the soybeans in the center-west states, they start to plant safrinha corn, sometimes in the same day or in day after.
And they're getting good rain.
Yes, at this moment, yes, that's good for safrinha. Yeah. So here you can see the corn distribution in Brazil by region. More than half of production is concentrated in the center-west as a second crop called safrinha. Corn production is also advancing as a second crop into the new agriculture frontier, Mato Piba. Mato Piba is a name of a region in the northeast of Brazil. Is Maranhão, Tocantins, Piauí, and Bahia is the name of the 4 states. In the potential of the growth in the second corn crop, safrinha, is an opportunity for Brazil to double its corn production in the coming years. Here on the map, you can see again the distribution from the center-west, safrinha, more than 50%. South represent around 20% of the corn production, is the first crop that's are facing a drought at this moment. I think I showed this map in all my presentations, and I still put in this map because I think it's very interesting, very important to explain how corn production works in Brazil. you can see, for example, 3 crops per year in Brazil. In Brazil, it's possible to harvest 3 crops per year, which one in a different region and season. And it's important to highlight that when we talk about 3 corn crops per year, they are not on the same land. Rotation is normally between grains such as soybeans, corn, beans, and pasture crops. I'm not talking about corn in the same land in the same year. The first crop is concentrated in the south of Brazil. The second crop, safrinha, is in the center west. We have some regions in the southeast that is possible to have first or second crop. And in the northeast of Brazil, we have a third crop. It's still very small, represent less than 2% of the corn production in Brazil. But if you go back 20 years ago, safrinha, little harvest in Portuguese, was very small, and today represent more than 70% of the corn production in Brazil.
And the third crop is, tell me again, the third crop follows, what does the third crop situation look like in the blue areas?
Actually, this represents less than 2% of the corn production, and the harvest actually will start because in the end of the year. So it's harvest time now. This area faced a drought too, because normally, but in some areas they have rains. I would say that the situation there is on the average, but to be honest, I don't have many informations from there because our focus represent less than 2% of the production. But northeast in La Niña year, normally they have amount of the rains in opposite and then south of Brazil.
Well, let's pause here for just a moment, Joanna, and ask a question of the folks that are online with us about what they think the future should look like or might look like of corn production in Brazil. That question is pretty simple. Could the Brazil surpass the United States as the world's top corn exporter? So this is not production, but exporter. And select one of the following: yes, no, or I'm not sure. So just offhand, do you think that the nation of Brazil might be able to ship out more corn than the United States? For reference point, there's about 5 billion bushels of corn produced in Brazil a year, if I remember the numbers correctly, and something like 12 to 14 billion in the United States. So the question is, how much of that gets exported, and can Brazil surpass the US in just total export? So we'll take a moment, see what you think, and get some answers from you. About 60% of you have voted at this point, and it looks to me like most of you are thinking, yeah, probably they can do that. In fact, as we get the answers, 57%, more than half of you say that's going to be correct. And I think Joanna may have something more to say about that. Joanna? Oh, well.
By the way, one of our commenters, who I think is from Brazil, we can't say names here, thinks that the corn production has had good profitability, and there's a new export corridor with China.
Yeah, exactly that. So the outlook is very positive. Just here, I will show some numbers that help to understand. The outlook is very positive for corn exports in Brazil, which hit a record in 2022 with 44 million tons. The main destination in 2022 was not China, because the shipments start in November. The main destinations were Iran, Spain, Japan, Egypt, Colombia, and South Korea. But last November, the Chinese market opened up to Brazilian corn for the first time. China has signed an agreement with Brazil to import corn. So in 2023, the potential of shipments to meet Chinese demand ranged from 6 to 10 million tons. That way, Brazil can reach a total export almost 50 million tons. This amount is very close to the forecast for U.S. corn exports in 2023, according to USDA, around 53 million tons. So I would say that Brazil should surpass the United States in the amount of corn exported in less than 2 years. Of course, we'll see there are many factors at the play, international market, price, but if we continue in the same pace, Brazil could surpass the United States maybe in 2025, 2026, not more than that. Yeah, so our audience was right. More than 57% answered that yes, Brazil could surpass. This graphic is very interesting too because shows corn exports from the top 4 global suppliers: United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Ukraine. Before the China-Brazil deal was finalized last year, China's main options for corn imports were the United States, Ukraine, and Argentina. Now Argentina is short of corn because of the drought. Ukraine has become unstable with the Russian invasion, and corn prices are rising in the United States because the dollar is very strong, because the cost of the production. So here you can see in the last 20 years, the time series regarding the corn exports from United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Ukraine. So for sure, this topic is very important to follow in the next months and next years too. So here we have a summary of the grain market outlook in Brazil before we start to talk about Argentina. So high domestic demand and global prices are the main drivers for the expanded planted area in Brazil in the current season. The depreciation of the Brazilian currency relative to the dollar. Today, it's necessary around 5 reals, the Brazilian currency, to buy $1. The expected margins for soybean and corn remain positive, despite the rise in production costs, especially fertilizers. And Brazil is expanding its ethanol corn production. Today, there are 17 corn ethanol plants in operation in Brazil, especially in the center-west, where the corn is concentrated as a second crop, the safrinha. So this market increased a lot in the last 5 years, and the forecast that will continue increase and push the demand for corn production. So we have 22 minutes of webinar. Let's move on to crop prospects in Argentina, for you have time to receive questions. So let's start with an overview of the crop in progress in Argentina. Almost 100% of Argentina's corn and soybeans were planted as of the end of January. The planting progress is similar to the last year for this date. However, around 70% of soybeans were planted outside the period when the maximum potentials are reached. This happened normally between October and November, and many soybeans needed to be planted just in December because the severe drought in Argentina. Months of drought have delayed the planting and forced cuts to project harvests. For example, drought conditions made it difficult to plant corn early in the season. Recent rains relieved much of Argentina's agricultural land in the last 2 weeks. Precipitations over Argentina's central agriculture area has prevented any new cuts to the Argentinian soybean and corn harvests. On this map, you can see the difference between January 18 and January 25 after Argentina received amounts of rain. This helped a lot Argentina production. Now, take a look at the numbers regarding soybean production in Argentina in this current crop season. Soybean acreage is expected to decrease 1%, around 40 million acres. And because of the weather conditions, the production is projected to decrease 12 percent compared to the last year, reaching only 1.3 billion bushels. You can see the last 10 years, actually the last 3 years, Argentina faced a drought because the La Niña. We are talking a little bit more about that. So when you can see the production in these last 3 years decrease all years because of that. Many areas like I said, many areas in Córdoba, Buenos Aires, and Pampas have received different amounts of rain over the last 2 weeks. In those areas, crops have improved a lot. Soybeans planted early in October faced a severe drought in September also. As a consequence, losses and lower yield potential in Argentina. Soybean planted later, for sure, are in much better shape at this moment. Rain in the coming weeks will be crucial for the fields in Argentina. February, it's a crucial period for made soybeans in Argentina and in the south of Brazil. These pictures were taken in different regions in Argentina in January. The first pictures in the northern Argentina, and the second picture in Córdoba, central region in Argentina. And because of the dry weather, we also see that corn acreage is expected to decrease 17% this current season. Argentina is projected to produce 1.9 billion bushels, a decrease of 8% from last year. Here, again, you can see in the last 2 years, because of La Niña effect, Argentina reduced the amount of harvest and decreased the area of the corn production too. So, drought conditions made it challenging to plant corn early in the season. There are 3 no recoverable situations in the corn planted early. Areas could not be planted because the land was very, very dry in September last year, October. Crops planted, but they have died because the lack of the rain. And plants that survived with lower yield potential. So they still there on the field, but the potential of the yields will be very low. In general, corn planted later, I'm saying in December, is in a much better condition. The silk emergence is in February, so it will be essential to follow the situation in the next weeks to see if this corn will be able to get good yields, because they are suffering from a drought in the last weeks, in the last months.
Let's pause again. We'll poll our folks online to see what they have to say about this question. With Argentina's corn crop stressed, could the U.S. have a better chance at selling corn before Brazil's safrinha harvest in July? Yes, no, I don't know. So the corn crop in Argentina is stressed. Does that mean that the United States might be able to put some exports into the marketplace before that second crop corn comes out of, or the safrinha comes out of Brazil? In their harvest doesn't come, of course, until July. Go ahead and answer that question. I was taking a quick look back at some of the cropping calendars for Argentina, just to see what that looked like for both soybeans and corn. Interestingly enough, they do have a first and a second crop for soybean, relatively speaking, according to the FAS. And generally that first crop is put in sometime in October, November, or December for soybeans, mostly November and December. And the second crop can run into the first part of January. And for corn, much earlier, actually. They run late September all the way through December. So anything that's planted after that is really pretty late, I would think. So let's go back to the question then and get some answers here. With Argentina's corn crop stress, could the U.S. have a better chance of selling corn before Brazil's safrinha crop? Most everybody says, about 80% of you, 78% in fact, say, yep, that probably could be the case. We'll talk more about that in just a moment, and we'll continue on with Joana Colussi here. year. Joana?
This is a third consecutive La Niña. I show a lot of pictures regarding the drought situation, even in the south of Brazil and in Argentina. So in La Niña year is when the temperatures are below average across most of the Pacific Ocean. La Niña usually creates a hotter and drier summer in Argentina, and so far has been doing so. We have some consequence, such as the driest period in 30 years, especially from August to December. The lowest wheat harvest in 7 years. The wheat production in 2022 in Argentina was 45% smaller compared to the last year. By the way, Brazil reached a record of the wheat production last year because Brazil had good yields and because Brazil increased the area after the war in Ukraine. And another consequence from the La Niña is delayed planting time in Argentina, and again with yields of soybean and corn at the risk because of that. So this graphic is interesting because we can see the relationship. We talk a lot about La Niña, El Niño, neutral year, but how is the relationship between corn yields and soybean yields when you talk about La Niña and El Niño? Over the last 30 years, the data shows a strong relationship between La Niña and El Niño episodes and corn yield levels in Argentina. Most of the yields in El Niño years, the red dots, are above the trend line. And the majority in La Niña years, the blue dots, are below the trend line. So if we focus on extreme values, note that all very high yield levels happen in El Niño crop years. Also, all low yield levels happen in La Niña crop years that we are seeing now at this moment in Argentina and in the south of Brazil. This data suggests a very low probability of having very high yields in La Niña years and very low yields in El Niño years. We're talking here about corn, but when you see the soybeans, we see the same pattern when you look at the relationship between soybean yields and La Niña. Most of the yields in El Niño years, red dots, are above the trend line, and the majority in La Niña years, blue dots, are below the trend line. So, and unfortunately, or fortunately, we don't know, depend the eyes that you are looking at, we have been having La Niña for 3 years in a row since 2020. However, there is a forecast of a transition from La Niña to a neutral year starting in February now, 2023. So there is a chance of 82% that's happened. So that could be a good news for Argentina soybeans and corn production, Brazil as well, especially in the south of Brazil. So here we have a summary of the grain market outlook in Argentina. At this moment, farmers are selling small amounts of grains because of yield uncertainty. They don't know how much they will, how many they will harvest. So because of that, they are a little afraid to sell amount of the grains that they will not be able to deliver. Argentinians at this moment, too, Argentinian farmers are waiting to see if the government decides to repeat the green dollar action. It's a law allowed farmers to tap a preferential exchange rate, which is meant to attract US dollars for grain transaction. As you know, Argentina is facing a very hard time in its economy, so they needed to attract dollars for the country. Last year, the government offered a preference exchange rate twice in two situations, in September and in December. And in these two moments, Argentinian farmers, they sell a lot of grains to take advantage from this preferential exchange rate. So very briefly, before I finish the overview of the presentation regarding Brazil and Argentina, I would like just to present some topics to keep an eye on over the following years in Brazil and Argentina. So let's start with Brazil. The potential of increasing safrinha corn in Brazil, the second crop. Brazil has emerged as a competitor to the US in corn, especially in exports, like we saw. The expanding of ethanol production in Brazil. Today, there are 17 corn ethanol plants in Brazil, 15 in the center west of Brazil, and we will have more investments coming. Environmental issues in Brazil regarding Amazon forest, regarding the use of land, the conversion of the areas to agriculture, and carbon market. It's a huge market in Brazil with a lot of opportunities. And finally, the new president in Brazil, Lula, and his relationship with agriculture. He became official president in Brazil 1 month, so it's very, we have just 30 days to talk about that, but it's for sure it's one topic that we should follow to see what's going on during this year, in the next 4 years, actually. So, and now some topics regarding Argentina. Maybe we should follow early corn development to see if the Argentinian farmers can accomplish all foreign sales for delivery from March to May. When you talk about affidavits, exports in Argentina must do this to pay export tax to the government. So before they sell the corn or soybeans, they need to complete these foreign sales affidavits. And there are sales affidavits of 8 million tons from March to May 2023. And there is no certainty if there will be that amount of corn harvest for that time. So in this window, maybe United States could have some opportunities to sell more corn before the safrinha arrives in the market around June and July. And finally, we have general elections in Argentina in October this year, so it's an important topic too, to see if if the tax exports for soybeans and meat, they will continue or not. So it's a very important topic too. So I think so far we finished the main presentation, but now I'm very happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you very much so far for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. Of course, if you have questions for Joana Colussi, who's postdoctorate here and part of the FarmDoc team, or for Gary Schnitke, agricultural economist, both are in the studio with us. You can type those out. We'll get to them. I would like to thank some of our sponsors. They include the TIA Center for Farmland Research, Compare Financial, Corteva Agrisciences, Farm Credit Illinois, FS Growmark, the Illinois Soybean Association, and the Illinois Corn Growers Association. Our educational partners include Extension here at the state of Illinois and the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics. We'll get to some updated things that are coming up here too for what's happening with the next set of webinars. On next Thursday, we'll talk about the Farm Bill. That's on the 9th of February. The 15th, farmland price and interest rates, and we'll wrap up with the FarmDoc team. Hold all of them. That'll be interesting to see how many of you can get in studio. Jim Baltz, who's behind the scenes here. Pretty tight, cramped quarters here. We'll wrap that up. The whole team will be here, so you'll be able to ask them questions. And then on the 7th day of March, they'll all be over. A lot of them will be at the Beef House in Covington, Indiana. You can check that out at willag.org. That's a website, willag.org. One other website I think probably you want to put in the background for yourselves, and this is pretty easy because it makes a difference. If you want to know what crop calendars look like across the whole globe, especially from South America. You can search them out. Try this, FAS, which stands for Foreign Agricultural Service, FAS, and then comma, crop calendar should be the first thing that comes up. And those are important because they help you get an idea of what marketing might look like. We'll talk some about that in just a bit. You can put the crop here in the United States in construct with crops coming into the marketplace, the export market in particular, across the whole of the U.S. We do have a few questions that have been asked. Let's start with a question that's been a topic of news. Argentina and Brazil have been thinking about combining their currency. Is this a good idea? What impact might it have on the marketplace, Joanna?
Yeah, that's a hard question, and sounds a little, for me at least, maybe a crazy idea. But the new currency would be an additional to the two national ones, Real and Pesos, rather than a replacement. And that is a long-term project. Lula and the president from Argentina, they start to talk about that 2 weeks ago, and other countries are not racing to join, so it will be a big challenge. But of course, the attractions of a new common currency are most obvious for Argentina, where annual inflation approaches almost 100% as the central bank prints money to finance spending. Most economists that have downplayed that idea as poorly timed and far from the probably. To be honest, I agree. I think that idea will not go forward because it will be very complicated to put Brazil and Argentina in the same currency at this moment, even though not be the official currency, but it will create a lot of difficulties for Brazil, especially. In my opinion, Brazil risks its sound monetary policy by strengthening ties with Argentina, still trying to regain credibility on its public accounts. So Brazil today is in much better situation than Argentina. What we can gain to do this agreement with a common currency, for me, it's make any sense, but we'll see.
That would imply that there would have to be one central bank, I suppose.
Exactly. Yes. I try to say that we will keep the both, or because not to be official currency, it will be one additional currency. But if it will be one additional currency, there is no reason to happen, because when you think a common currency like a euro, you have or you don't have. If it is not official, what will you gain with that? So. But it's very incipient discussion.
Next question. Go ahead.
So Brazil can be Germany and Argentina will be Italy in that arrangement. Italy agrees. So there you go. Go ahead.
Our next question is, Brazil now using corn for ethanol and not as much from sugarcane. So do we know what the percentage of corn ethanol base there is and percentage of sugarcane?
Actually, the majority is from sugarcane, for sure. Ethanol, I don't remember exactly the percentage, but it's less than 15% that Brazil use today from corn. This is these investments in corn plants, ethanol corn plants in Brazil. This happened in the last 5 years, so it's very recent. Increased a lot. There is a big potential to still increasing, but so far represent less than 15% of the ethanol production in Brazil. The most is from sugarcane.
Yeah,
so what do they do? So then they're feeding the DDGs like here, I suppose, in Mato Grosso.
Yes, I'm not sure about how that will work there, but yeah, they are in Mato Grosso in Central West, especially because the corn was there. So makes more sense they use corn than get sugarcane from the Southeast, especially in São Paulo.
Little factoid here, in 2009, the former governor of Mato Grosso, who became Bolsonaro's ag ministry, his name was Lauro Maggi, visited campus, and they really wanted to see an ethanol plant. So I took them, along with a very large sugarcane producer, to the ethanol plant in Palestine, Illinois, to the south of us. So you can blame me, I guess. There are 17 plants there now. Interesting factoid. Up next, Mexico previously said it plans to contract with farmers in Brazil and Argentina to buy non-GMO yellow corn as the country moves closer to its scheduled ban of genetically modified corn in 2024. This has to do with the United States and Mexico and exports from here to there, which they say is... which, if this was to be the case, could also help bolster corn exports from Brazil. So the question then is lost to me at this point. There we go. Bring it back. Thank you. Can you please speak on your thoughts on this about non-GMO corn in Brazil? GMO and non-GMO corn, what hybrids do they grow? There is really the question.
Yeah, it's the same. It's pretty similar than soybeans. It's a niche of market like here that you have some farmers investing that in the center west, especially looking for markets that pay more for that. But again, it's a niche, market niche is not and we have some investments, especially when you think about environmental issues. And so we see increase in the last years regarding corn and soybeans too. But again, these represent a small portion of the total corn and soybean production in Brazil.
That third crop corn in Brazil, this is another question. Is it mostly for domestic consumption or all for export?
Yeah, I would say could be for both. If you look the locations in the northeast, but northeast they get Mato Piba to Maranhão, Tocantins, Piauí, and Bahia. So could be both. Of course, some regions I would say for more domestic consumption, but when you go to Maranhão, not in the east, but a little bit inside of the country, like Maranhão and Piauí, that's northeast too. But there is safrinha, second crop. Yes, I would say that the third crop is more for domestic consumption, but if it's still increasing, could be for exports, especially because in the last years, Brazil received a lot of investments in new railroads and ports, especially in the north ports, because during the many years, Brazil has a high dependence of the ports in the southeast, in São Paulo, Santos, and Paraná, Paranaguá. But today, 50% of the all grain exports in Brazil is through north ports by the Amazon River and Maranhão, Itaqui port. So today, 50% of the grain production in Brazil is export from the north ports and another 50% from the south ports. So the third crop, as is in the northeast, they have the advantage to be export through north ports.
I know you gave the name of it, but it was very quickly. Which export port serves that northeast area, and it's on the coast as opposed to the Amazon, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
we have one in Pará. The name is Santarém. Another one is in Maranhão state. The name is Itaqui.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have two in Bahia. We have another one. I don't remember the name now, but I can check it here.
All right.
Yeah.
Moving on. How confident do you feel about Brazil's ability to mitigate climate change-induced changes to both corn and soybean production over the future? How is the agronomic disease risk looking on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would like that many people have the opportunity to visit Brazil and see what we have there regarding conservation practice. Because sometimes, especially abroad, outside, we receive a lot of negative information. I'm not saying that we don't have problems in Brazil. We have, but this represents a small portion of the agriculture production in Brazil. So I'm sure that Brazil has a huge capability to increase the practice regarding environmental. Today, Brazil has one of the most restrictive environmental law. Is more restrictive here than here in the US and Europe for sure. And I think that's the trend, is one trend that we need to follow, not just Brazilians, but American, Europeans. And I'm sure that Brazil has capability and expertise to keep the conservation areas and even though to increase this practice.
It appears that we got an answer about the percent of ethanol coming from corn from an agricultural economist
13.
in Brazil.
Thank you, Janaína.
And that number is 13%.
I'd say less than 15. Yes.
Is corn
Thank you.
ethanol. So thank you very much for the answer to that question. Moving on, what are the implications of Brazil's ascendancy as a primary exporter to China to negotiations on non-tariff trade barriers and partnering with the U.S. on trade negotiations? Either of you want to take a stab at that one?
So, John, you raise the same GMOs that we do in the United States. So wouldn't the issues be roughly the same?
Yeah, I would say I'm trying to figure out to negotiate. Yeah, I don't know. What do you say, Gary? Because I don't know the answer.
Right.
So I would say that that's a more of a political issue than
I would say
trade issue, perhaps,
Yeah.
because we have the same genetics both here in the United States and Brazil. So we're in a lot of the non-tariff trade barriers related to that is related to GMOs. So
and this agreement that Brazil and China signed last year, it's agronomic agreement, phytosanitary agreement that include all of them. And they actually, in the last years, they tried to do this agreement, and many times it was stuck because of that. But I think now the demand is stronger than other concern. Maybe China needs to buy more corn from South America because at this moment, for example, it's cheaper than buy corn from the North America. But to be honest, I don't see any implications so far, maybe.
and I would also mention that the United States has pretty much backed away from trade agreements, one form or another, since Trump, and Biden hasn't shown any more appetite for free trade.
Yeah, and in Washington, D.C., they have not, again, passed the legislation or put forth the idea that the president can negotiate a trade agreement and then just not be amended at all by Congress. So until that happens again, we probably won't be in a trade negotiating event, I would not think anyway. This one's about crop rotations year over year. They want to know what rotation practices are followed. It's a very large country from north to south. So I'm thinking maybe, is it just an in-season rotation, generally speaking, in the bulk of the country because it's so much closer to the equator and has such a long growing season, or does it change year over year? So is it soybeans, second crop corn, and that's the rotation and it just continues every year, or do they put a third crop in somewhere?
It depends the region, the climate. Like you said, it's a huge country. But when you think about the south of Brazil, when we have cold days during the winter, the double cropping there normally in the summer is soybeans or corn. Is like here, the farmers need to choose between corn and soybeans. In the winter time, they have wheat production, wheat, barley, some winter crops, or cover crops. So that's rotation between summer crops and winter crops. So soybeans, corn, and wheat. When you go to the center west, like I said, the first crop, normally soybeans, the second crop, the safrinha, the corn, and they have a third crop sometimes with beans. They have some pasture, so cover crops too. And in the northeast, that the climate is different, they can do some third crop with minor crops that we have short cycle. So, but sometimes they try to change because, of course, you are talking about a tropical country, so you have a lot of pressure regarding bugs or the resistance of the chemicals. But I would say that don't change so much year by year. And of course, in the south of Brazil, you have livestock, so they use a lot for pasture. And even though in the center west too.
because you mentioned livestock, we do have a question on livestock. Can you talk about domestic consumption there, and how much of a meat exporter they might be, or that Brazil might be? I suppose we should probably mention JBS in that note as well. JBS, of course, is a large meatpacking company, and if I remember correctly, there is a U.S. version of it, but it came out of Brazil originally.
Yes, you are right. Actually, we have a huge market, domestic market, and an international market. When you think about meat, we are talking about meat. Brazil is the number one in exports. When you talk about poultry, Brazil is the number one in exports too. And when you talk about pork, Brazil is the number 4. Back to meat, for example, Brazil, the internal consumption is around 50-60% is in the domestic market. Around 40% is for exports, and that's made Brazil the number one in meat exports. The poultry, I would say, is almost the same, is 65-70% for domestic market, and the third 4% for exports. And the pork, I would say that the most of markets domestic, but Brazil, it's a powerhouse for livestock too. We have most of our breed in Brazil. It is not Angus, is Nelore, especially in the center west, but in the south of Brazil, for example, we have Angus because it's cold, so it's very close to Brazil, to Argentina and Uruguay, Pampas region. But yes, and if you have grain, you have meat production. So if you have corn and soybeans, so you can feed our meat industry in Brazil, and you have huge meat packing, like you mentioned, GBS and BRF. It's a Brazilian company, also Minerva Foods, a lot of companies, national companies.
Joana, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. And Gary Schnittke, thank you too for being with us. Joana Colussi and Gary Schnittke are both in the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics here in the College of Agricultural, Consumer, Environmental Sciences at the University of Illinois. You've been watching and listening to an Illinois Farm Economics Summit webinar, IFAS Online. It's one in a series of 6. You're already signed up for them all. We'll look forward to having you back next Thursday again. Don't forget that you can always find our programming online, including this webinar, not very long from now, probably this afternoon, on our website at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu. Look in the archives section, or you can visit youtube.com/@farmtalk for the 5-minute Farm Docs, and Farm Doc video is the / if you want to find everything. On behalf of Gary Schnittke and Joana Colussi and our technical director behind the scenes, Jim Bolts, today, I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.